and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week we cook up a delicious story for you, our customers and patrons and dear friends. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to tell you a story. Reed, welcome back.
Good to be back.
Are you going to give us the recap since you listened to the story more recently than we have?
Yep. You guys started a really great story. I really enjoyed listening to it. Did we have a title for this one yet?
I believe I just called it The Fountain of Youth.
The Fountain of Youth. That's good. So Seth's story element was genre, but it kind of morphed into setting a little bit because to set up, we decided partway in to his explanation that it was a mystery suspense situation, and the setting is like late World War II. Think like World War One, like thinking like 1918, that kind of level of technology. But literally in the war, they have the trenches and the no man's land, and they had the rolling barrage, and the guys went over the top, and they came in, and they found the enemy trenches empty, and there was like a fog, and it was like eerie and weird. And then they went back, and their trenches were empty. And then they started checking out the area and like the local villages. They were empty too. It was just like this mystery. And I mean, you walk into someone's house, say hello, and there would be like dinner would be served, and the potatoes would be steaming on the table, and nobody would be there. And so it was this great mystery. It was sort of like a post-apocalyptic kind of setting, but nobody knew what the apocalypse was. It was just gone. And so that's kind of the event, or kind of the setting that this mystery suspense story is taking place. And they didn't even really have an idea of how. They're just really wondering what's going on. Levi had the magic system, and he talked about, the old Fountain of Youth stories. There was Ponce de Leon and the, looking through southern Florida. There had been myths about the Fountain of Youth, that there was this special place where the water would keep you young forever. And a very closely guarded secret, however, was that some of the explorers had actually found a Fountain of Youth in South America, and they just really guarded this secret, because it was too valuable to let go. But what it was they had just found an interesting kind of life form,
right?
Almost a rock-based life form that that this rock-like creature was like a filter feeder. It would crush minerals and pass it through their system, like a worm, feeding on the compost pile, Anyway, but this rock-like life form would emit a waste product when it was dissolved in water, would be like an elixir of life. And you could use it like a bath. I think of like a sarcophagus, like in the Stargate series, where the Goa'uld would get into this bath and it would like rejuvenate them. So that was one way this thing could be used. It could be like ingested, and it would just give like powers. You could run faster, you could see clearer, and your senses would be heightened, and you were quicker and more coordinated. The problem is in all its uses is very addictive. When it's broken down and consumed, it becomes like Coke, like ×5. And it was used in World War I for special troops, kind of like special forces types that they could, for a limited number of people, they would give them this, and they would perform like super soldiers. They could go without sleep. They could go. Anyway, it was so. The problem though is this hyper addictive. If someone was set up with one of these bath type setups, it's like it would rejuvenate you physically, but the more you used it, the more you needed to use it. and it's like the effect would not last as long, and then if you kept using and using and using, you kind of go crazy. You'd literally start your connection to reality would start breaking down. So there was this whole kind of thing, and you guys are going to have to help me now because I don't have the details written down. But there was a couple of characters that you brought in. There was one kind of like a Shaolin monk type guy who had the ability to alter the metabolizing of this substance.
Yeah, he could help people basically detox from the addiction.
Right.
And what I think we said was that the hero or one of the people in it had like a large amount of this inside of him, and he learned from the Shaolin monk guy to let it out like very slowly, and therefore he could like increase his abilities very quickly if he needed to. But if he did it too much, then it would start to kind of take over. It would like start to take control.
Right.
I think those were just the two sort of creatures, the two sort of people that we Seth, unless you remember anyone else.
Trying to rack my brain back and remember. I know there was.
That's fine. We'll just go with those two.
Yeah, I think that's all I can remember as specific characters right off the bat.
Yeah. So that's the recap, Reed?
Yeah.
Great. So what story elements did you guys have?
Well, I just kept my same one that I didn't use last week. Something based on a book I'm reading.
Great. I had villain.
And I had Ka-Tet members.
Well, Reed, since you didn't do last week, you should say yours now then.
Okay. Well, I've been going back through the Wheel of Time series, and there's I just really was enjoying, especially the Fountain of Youth kind of magic system, because in the Wheel of Time, you have certain people that they call it, they have the ability to channel the one power. Okay, so among those who can channel the one power, they're certainly not a small percentage of the people can actually do this. But there are those whose stated his intention to serve the light or the forces of good, so to speak. And I say stated intention because they're people are people, and even like the Aes Sedai, whose stated intention are to serve the light. There are people that have their character faults and foibles and whatnot, and one of the things that they try to do is they swear on the oath rod, so that they will never say anything that is not true. They will not use their power to create a weapon of war, and they will not use the power as a weapon in battle, except for self-defense or the defense of their warder, so to speak. But anyway, this oath rod was supposed to, recognize the danger of abuse of so much power. Now, on the other side, the Dark Lord, he would offer seats of power kind of unrestrained, except, of course, by strict obedience to him, and immortality. And this really is seductive because you don't... anyway, and I see this... I wanted to bring the element into this story where you have people that have use of the power, and I didn't know, of course, when I made this up, what it would look like, but
yeah,
you have the side that's kind of the dark side, where use the power to manipulate and control and seduce people to do your bidding and all that, and then you have the other side where you're trying to limit the damage and use it for a force for good kind of thing,
Yeah.
So I just thought it fit really kind of cool into this story.
Okay. So I'm sorry, maybe I got lost. What was the element?
Something based on a book I'm reading.
Okay, how?
Oh,
no, I mean, what was, you just told us about Wheel of Time.
Yeah, I know, but I see it fitting into this story in that you have, the dark forces would want to get control, and I think as part of what had happened with, you have the people that had control of this time from the 16th century when they first discovered it, and it was in the halls of power of the rich and powerful,
right?
And held, and then when it came to the current situation, World War I, using it, for to empower soldiers, kind of super soldiers, so to speak. And then some of the people that fancied themselves as people that would be ruling and controlling, or have themselves set up with these immortality baths, so that they could, enjoy the fruit of their power for longer, because that's the appeal of kind
Right.
of the kind of the dark side of seeking after immortality.
Gotcha. Okay, I see. I see now what you're saying.
Yeah.
Should I talk about the villain?
Yes.
So he is called many things by many different people. He goes walking in unrequested into any house of power that he wants in the world. And he is known classically in any language that he might be in as the feeder. 6'2", slight build, broad shoulders, but very gaunt, very pale skin, black hair. He is somewhat questionable as far as his origin. He's been around. There aren't that many people who have been around since the beginning of since the Fountain of Youth was created. And it is said that he is one of them. There's maybe like 3 people still alive who've been around since then. The only way to retain such a vitality / not going insane is to be laser focused in your will to not feed the addiction. So he bathes for exactly 10 minutes in the pool every 6 months. He gets in, soaks himself down, 10 minutes, and he's out. Right? And that isn't enough. Really, he could probably do 30 minutes every 6 months, but he has kind of held himself back in order to maintain his mind. Why he's called the feeder is because he looks after what he calls our children, which is the network of augmented human beings in the world, right? Which he knows where they are, just sort of intuitively. He's been alive for hundreds of years, so things about him are different. He can walk up to you and he can tell what level of saturation you have just by touching your skin. He knows the last time you consumed any water laced with the Fountain of Youth. And he is kind of, imagine like those slimy Gestapo sort of individuals in Nazi Germany. He's kind of like that. And he has power, and he exerts his power because he organizes all of these groups, and he organizes it for both sides. So any government that elects to use this super soldier program, he immediately basically gets keys to your house, and he'll visit you anytime he wants to, and you basically have to give him whatever you want in order to secure victory. A lot of good men have secured victory for their countries and later tried to write about the regret they felt about the things that they allowed to happen, the deals that they made. And the reason why he's called the feeder is because one of his big things is he sends groups of lightly intoxicated to not really intoxicated soldiers into groups of these super soldiers for them to consume in order to get back some of their humanity. Right? So a person who is kind of going a little bit too far off the reins, right, and starting to go a little bit crazy, starting to kind of grow scales on their skin and starting to go kind of crazy, if they consume the flesh of a person who is less tainted than they are, then they will basically come down a little bit as the percentage mix tips the other way, right?
Ooh.
And so he's called the feeder because he directs this. He's the one who directed Adolf Hitler's platoon. I think it was platoon that he was a part of.
Okay.
Into the battle where Adolf Hitler was the only survivor of. And then now, years later, in the future, he will also be the one that Adolf Hitler will employ to do terrible things in World War II. So he does not play sides. His he views himself as a brood mother, as a caretaker, and so he's slimy and gross, and his eyes he never blinks. He's just, there's something wrong with him. So this isn't a villain that gets defeated at the end of this story. This is just like a villain that exists. And so part of what I'm thinking is that this thing that happened happened because of a directed feeding, right?
Okay.
So they were told to go over the top, sort of counter to their actual orders, right? They were told to go over the top by a good general who was not in the know.
Yeah.
And they charged forward these, 100 or so people and found the area empty. And then they came back and found their trenches empty. And because this was like an organized thing to feed a bunch of super soldiers.
Okay.
So maybe we're moving a little bit more into horror than from suspense, but I don't know.
Well,
I'm into it.
A couple things with kind of where it's going, with kind of some of the stuff going on, because I think World War One, one of the things that they talk about it ending was because of the prop up of Spanish flu, and then more people, quote unquote, dying of Spanish flu, and it looking a lot, similar to other things, but Spanish flu starting to kill off more people than the war ever did. And so I don't know if you're into conspiracies, and that could be maybe whatever we're coming up here is like what was really going on. And then they just said, oh, there was the Spanish flu started killing everybody.
Oh yeah.
We had to call off the war.
Yeah.
And so then everybody goes home, and unless someone kind of knew about it or got involved, but if that was the case, a lot of these people were just kind of, fed along down the line, or if they did go home, they were tracked down.
Because as you get closer to the end, you want less people out on the field, because we're saying that this is close to the end of World War One.
Yeah.
So as you get closer to the end, you want less people who are saturated with this material.
Right.
Right? Because a person who's, let's say, 5% saturated, they're not going to go insane. They might have a nightmare, once every 6 months or something. They might, have some, maybe they, 1 in 1,000 might have schizophrenia, due to this. But what they're all going to do is they're all going to live to be 150.
Yeah.
What they're all going to do is retain their youth until they're 80 years old.
Yikes.
They're all going to...
the greatest generation, huh?
Hey, they're all going to be able to do all these things, So what you want to do is, now that the war is quote unquote winding down, is you want to consolidate all of that and take all your super soldiers and get them back into sort of normal human looking shape, so that you can sort of wrap things up and not have any sort of weird things happen.
And blame the last bit of, either feeding or taking care of whatever, blamed on, casualties of war rather than freak accidents of some other kind of terror.
Exactly. And so that's where this whole them being told to go over the top and being told to attack is the thing that kind of saved them, is because they weren't there then during the attack that was supposed to have killed them, So how many people do we want to say it was? Like, survived, basically made it back. We could say it's like 50. I don't know what size, like a platoon, a squad. I don't know what the size of these military things are. Reed, you can help me with this.
Yeah, platoons, it varies, but depending on how the table of organization equipment it is, sometimes around 40 platoon, 3 platoons plus a heavy weapons platoon for in an infantry company, for example, figure around 150. You get 3 companies and some attachments, and you get a battalion of rubber with 500 or so.
So, like, how many people would be?
I would say maybe whatever this group, whatever this general or this colonel or whatever was in charge of, because like the plans would have come down the line, and maybe like a line got cut, and so at so many 100 hours they go over the top, right? But then maybe he's all the way down on the one end of the line, and something got cut, and so the time comes, and he calls his troops up, and it's all coordinated, right? Because so then they all have their things like tallied. And then at the same time, they all execute that. Well, if he didn't get the order to not do that, well, then he was going to, on the time schedule, still do it. right?
Right.
And so maybe that's what he did. And so then they go over the top and, all the way down at the end, they might not have known it, but then they come over the top, they go across the field, and it's like, well, wait a minute, right? So then, what is it, 150, 200, down on that end, like maybe what, I don't know what that would be, like a major, a couple captains, and their, sergeants, they go over, they get to the enemy trench. Maybe they find that's where I think our one guy comes from. The guy that the Chinaman helps.
Yeah.
They kind of bring him back. Then maybe there's a few other like survivors or, some people that are really traumatized they bring back. But other than that, it was like the trenches were empty and like either, some people barely hanging on or, maybe in this case, looks like they got eaten or partly eaten, but then they, don't know. There's a few of them. And then from there, maybe then they check out their own trench. And then kind of by the end of the day, they come back and, they've been hitting these weird things where something's picking them off, and so then they're kind of consolidating, and then having to kind of like dig in and then kind of go, okay, well, we can't stay here. Well, let's go check and, get back behind, see if we can find, like the general camp, and that's empty. That kind of going from there, and so you have, I would say, starting out at 150, wouldn't be too bad to start with.
Yeah.
To then kind of have enough that you can knock enough off.
Yeah.
With the suspenseful things that need to happen, but then still have 10 to 12, for a nice solid band of brothers, to be in the end.
Yeah, that works. I like this idea. I like this idea of the mist.
Yeah.
I had an idea for it, but I didn't know if anyone else did. Seth, did you?
For the mist?
Yeah.
No, not particularly.
Well, I kind of like the idea that, like, when they found the Fountain of Youth at the beginning, it was surrounded by kind of like a mist.
Yeah.
And it sort of lulled you to sleep and helped you relax and really just kind of confused you and
yeah, it's like part of the rock creature's process is that there's byproducts that tend to evaporate and form this mist fog like thing that's going on.
And so then these super soldiers, when they get a certain sort of when they progress enough along the line, right? They start to develop sort of a rocky sort of texture on their back.
Yeah.
And that starts to, as they enter in quote unquote hunting mode.
Right.
That emits kind of like a mist.
Yeah.
That just kind of blankets the whole town and the whole area in this kind of fog.
Yeah.
That disorients, and kind of breaks your ability to concentrate, kind of relaxes everyone. And this is where the monk would come in really valuable because he sort of teaches people. We're saying that this whole thing's taking place in like a 12-hour period.
Right.
Right? Is that the thought, Seth?
At least, a couple days, maybe.
Okay.
For them to get across the countryside a little bit.
Right. Great. But I anyone else have any cool ideas? Oh, Seth, Ka-Tet members.
Yeah.
Oh, so, so I was listening to The Dark Tower.
Nice.
Or whatever the first one is, Gunslinger. And so, getting that I had Ka-Tet. So my initial idea for Ka-Tet thing isn't exactly worked out based on kind of what I was gathering, from the book. So I'm going to go with this other thing instead.
Okay.
Because then it won't add, let's say, too much more that, isn't more than kind of what we already have. And, kind of. Anyway, so as far as like the Ka-Tet, the entities that are kind of drawn together by fate, you have our, kind of our group of heroes, and kind of towards the end or middle to end, as everything is kind of breaking down and, you got this fog and all this stuff, and they kind of come up into this meadow, and the fog clears a little bit, and this flower, pokes its head up, from all the fog of war, and they see this bee drawn to the flower, and it pollinates the flower and flies back into its hive. And, they kind of see that, and it kind of is what, them bringing there at that time kind of gives them that hope that, with all this muck going around, that's got things changing and messed up and all this stuff, the very base things that bring, life and nature back to normalcy have already started settling back in. And it kind of gives them that turn of hope, going into the end of, whatever it is.
So this is like the kind of the surviving cadre of these soldiers.
Yep, the flower and the bee, for that moment.
That's awesome.
So yeah, the other idea that I had going through this, I mean, World War I was like a lot of chemical warfare. So I'm thinking that, like, maybe this platoon, the general, whatever, was kind of a hard ass, and so he made them, wear their gas masks all the time, and maybe that's what saved them from being lulled into,
oh yeah,
not sitting there. And so then when they're, for the most part, maybe some people take them off and they start getting lulled, and then they just like, no, you keep those on. Like, there's something going on, this mist. We don't know what this mist is, and it's, some chemical attack. And so they end up keeping their, their chemical masks on. And maybe that's why the other idea with that is maybe that's why there's like all this hot food, but then it looks like everyone just stood up and left. Right. And so it's like that mist that comes out and it lulls you.
Right.
But it's going to draw you to the source of what that is, if you're under that certain level. And so these towns or these villages will just empty out. And so all these people now who have very low saturation are now being drawn, right, to these beasts who then feed on them and come down, because that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so there's no struggle, in their village where they were. But then up in the, the hill where the, or the one part of the trench where the beast is, hiding out, it's drawing them out there. Maybe that's something they figure out. But, our platoon maybe starts out, better off because they were all wearing their, their gas masks.
Right.
And they, they were, realized that something was going on with like a chemical attack. You're almost envisioning this as like a movie too. But then like in a movie, they'd make everybody not wear their gas mask.
So you can see their faces
because they get FaceTime, but
I was also thinking maybe they have like a it's not just the Shaolin monk. Maybe they have like another type of indigenous person, like a Native American who like has some sort of special tea that he's having everyone drink, or a different, like an Indian, just think of all the different countries that participated in World War I.
Right.
It's like you could even have people who were indigenous to around the area of where the Fountain of Youth was, who like knew how to fight this specific narcotic effect, and therefore they were sort of making something for their squad or whatever, you know, and everyone's kind of like drinking it constantly because it like revitalizes you and, makes you feel whatever. And, it's
maybe it was like sage.
Yeah, something
that
like
is
that.
Something they use to cleanse like evil spirits. But then you have like, let's say somewhere out like the Southwest, Native Americans, because I know like the Navajo, I don't know what the Apache did, but I know the Navajo did a lot, during World War II. But maybe you have some of them, and maybe that was where some of, let's say, that came from, is you had the Fountain of Youth, like demons or whatever that were coming up,
know. Chupacabras.
And, that's what they would do to like cleanse that, mist out, that, that dry environment and the sage, and then the, so maybe that's.
And then you'd have a guy stumble into camp one day, one of the days, and he's like, he's from a platoon, and he's like, oh, he's so, harried, and then he tries to drink. They offer him some of this stuff because it's good, and he like tries to drink it, and he can't drink it because he's one of these super soldiers who have sort of now come down
Yeah.
But he like can't drink it because the saturation is still like over 50% in his body, and so it like, you know, he reacts violently, and everyone at first is like, oh, that's okay if you don't like it, but then, you know, there's like a confrontation, and that's where they get kind of some of the information, you know, that's where they, you know, have to fight him, and then they end up,
And they tie him down and have a sweat lodge.
yeah, basically, or they, you know, not torture him, but they convince him to talk to them, and that's where they get some information about he needs to meet back up with the feeder, or the feeder's platoon, you know. Anyways, I think we still have one more episode we could do on this. So let's plan on wrapping up. Let's plan on actually planning out how the story will go, and then wrapping it up next week. How's that sound, everybody?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this episode of Wait, It Gets Better. If you like this episode, please let us know. Our email address is waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com. Twitter handle is @getsbettercast. If you think you have some cool ideas for how the story could go, please let us know. We'd love to hear about it. If you think you have something you want to tell us about how bad our ideas are, those same email addresses and Twitter handles work. For everyone else who's just ready for the next episode, I'll just say, just wait. It gets better. Cut.
So I'll see if I can look it up, but I didn't have his